He stood at the fence line of his dying farm, watching the sky turn the color of old brass. Thunder muttered beyond the ridge, promising rain that never seemed to come. His land had been dry 3 summers straight. Corn had withered, cattle had thinned, and the well gave up more sand than water. Still, he worked it every day because that's what a Granger did. He worked until there was nothing left to work with. By nightfall, he was back in his small house, lamp burning low, reading the same worn Bible his father had kept in the war. The wind clawed at the windows, and the boards groaned like they might give. Eli had gotten used to the sound of emptiness. It was the only thing that answered him anymore. Then came the knock. It wasn't polite, and it wasn't human quiet. It boomed once, twice, 3 times, shaking dust from the rafters. Eli froze. Nobody came this far off the main road, not even the mail rider. He set the Bible down, reached for the rifle by the door, and eased it open. Lightning flared, and in that white flash, he saw 3 figures standing in the yard. They were women, tall as door frames and broad-shouldered as mules. The storm light made them look carved from the mountain itself. Their dresses were plain but clean, soaked from the rain that hadn't yet reached his side of the valley. One carried a lantern that glowed steady despite the wind. "Evening," Eli managed. His voice came out rough. "You ladies lost?" The tallest of the 3 smiled, her eyes dark and calm. "No, sir. We found what we came for." Before he could answer, thunder cracked again, rolling down the slope like a wagon of iron. The women stepped onto the porch without asking. Their boots hardly made a sound. Eli backed up, lowering the rifle but not letting go. "You can come in out of the rain, I suppose." "Thank you," said the one with the lantern. Her voice was smooth, almost musical. "We've been walking a long road to reach you, Mr. Granger." She spoke his name as if she'd known it forever. Eli frowned. "You know me?" "All the valley knows you," said the second woman, shorter, with copper hair and eyes the color of new leaves. "You're the man who never left when the drought came." Eli set the rifle aside, uneasy but curious. "Didn't see reason to leave. Figure if the Lord wants me gone, he'll say so himself." The third woman, youngest by the look of her, smiled faintly. Maybe he already did. That gave him pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" The tall one answered. "It means some debts aren't paid in coin or blood, Mr. Granger. They're paid in staying." Inside, the house felt smaller with them in it. They moved like people born to open spaces, too large for walls. Steam rose from their wet clothes as they stood near the fire. Eli poured coffee for himself, then hesitated before setting out 3 tin cups. "Ain't much, but it's hot." The copper-haired woman took hers, sniffed it once, and smiled. "Tastes like you brewed it with patience." He chuckled softly. "Only thing I got plenty of." When they drank, the silence stretched. The wind outside howled, but the air in the cabin stayed still, heavy, watchful. Eli tried to meet their eyes and found it harder than expected. There was something in those faces. Kindness, maybe, but mixed with something older, like they'd seen too much of the world to be surprised by any of it. Finally, he asked, "What brings 3 strangers to a poor man's farm in the middle of a storm?" The tall one set her cup down and said, "We're not strangers, Eli. We're the daughters of this mountain, and we've come to remind you of your promise." Eli blinked. "My what?" She stepped closer, her shadow stretching across the floorboards. "You swore years ago to keep this land alive, to feed it with your hands, not abandon it like the rest." He laughed uneasily. If I did, I don't remember it. The youngest tilted her head. Doesn't matter. The mountain remembers. Eli rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the sweat there despite the chill. So you three are what? Spirits? The tall one smiled again. Call us what you like. We come when the land chooses, and we leave when it's satisfied. Well, he said, land's near dead. Not sure what satisfaction it's finding. The copper-haired woman looked toward the window. Not dead. Sleeping. You've kept it alive longer than any man before you. That's why we're here. They stayed the night, uninvited yet impossible to send away. Eli offered them his bed, but they refused, saying the floor was fine. He didn't sleep much anyway. The sound of their voices murmuring low filled the dark like a hymn. Just before dawn, he drifted off and woke to a strange stillness. The wind had stopped. The air smelled different, sweet and sharp like rain on rock. He stepped outside. The sky had cleared to silver, and mist coiled in the hollows. Where the women had stood earlier, the ground glistened as if new grass had pushed through overnight. Eli turned toward the barn and froze. They were there again, all three, standing in a line before the gate. Morning light caught them in a way that made them look even taller, their outlines hazy like heat over sand. You shouldn't have come out alone, the tall one said. He frowned. My own land. Why shouldn't I? Because now it's awake, she said softly. And once the mountain wakes, it remembers who owes what. Eli's pulse jumped. What do I owe? The youngest woman smiled, gentle but strange. That's what you'll learn, Mr. Granger, but not in fear, in faith. Then she reached out, her hand hovering inches from his chest. Stay with us a while. Listen to the land. It's been trying to speak through you for years. Eli took a step back, breath catching. You talk like you expect me to bow to the dirt. Not bow, the copper-haired woman said, just belong. For the rest of that day, they worked beside him as if they'd always been part of the farm. The tall one mended the fence. The copper-haired one drew water from the stubborn well, and somehow it flowed easier than it had in months. The youngest cleaned the barn and sang low songs that made the animals calm. Eli watched all of it, half afraid, half grateful. By sundown, the fields smelled of rain again. Even the cattle lifted their heads and breathed deep, like life had come back to the place. When night fell, the women built a fire outside, and the flames burned blue instead of gold. They motioned him to sit. The tall one said, You think you bought this farm. You didn't. You were cold here. Eli stared into the fire, his heart thudding slow. Why me? Because you're the last Granger, she said. The last to remember what a promise means. And if I stay? The youngest looked up, eyes shining like river water. Then the land will live, and so will you. The copper-haired one added softly, If you leave, it dies. And so do you. Eli swallowed hard, the weight of their words settling deep. That sounds like a curse. No, the tall one whispered. It's a choice. He lay awake long after they'd gone quiet, listening to the wind return. The old rafters creaked, and somewhere outside a coyote cried once and fell silent. He thought about what they'd said, about belonging, promises, and debts older than memory. Sleep took him near dawn. When he woke, the house was empty. Only 3 faint footprints remained in the dust by the door, large, bare, and facing inward, as if they'd stepped not out into the world, but deeper into his home. He stared at them a long time, then whispered to the still air, What in God's name have I agreed to? The week after the storm felt like a dream stretched too long. Eli Granger woke each morning expecting the women to vanish, yet they were always there, tall, calm, and certain, working the land as if it had been theirs for centuries. They never asked for food or sleep. When he turned in at night, he could hear them outside, whispering to the soil as though it might answer. The first was Mara, the dark-haired one whose eyes seemed carved from the mountain itself. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of stone and river. The second, June, copper-haired and sharp-smiled, was all fire and motion. She could fix a plowshare with her bare hands and scold the wind into silence. The youngest, Lettie, had a voice soft as rain. She sang to the livestock, and they followed her like children. Eli tried to keep his mind steady on work, patching fences, redigging the well, but every hour that passed with them nearby made him feel smaller, weaker, and somehow blessed. They filled the empty corners of the farm, the way sunlight fills a church after winter. One evening, as twilight bled violet across the ridge, Eli found Mara standing beside the well, staring down into its blackness. "You drawin' water?" he asked. She shook her head. "Listen." He bent closer. There was a faint hum rising from the depths, not wind nor echo, more like a heartbeat under the ground. "The land's awake," Mara said. "It remembers who feeds it." Eli stepped back, uneasy. "I just dig. That's all I ever done." Mara's lips curved faintly. "Then you've already done more than most men." Later that night, while the others slept, June sat by the fire sharpening his old scythe. Sparks leapt and died in her hair. "You keep wondering what we want from you," she said without looking up. Eli froze at the doorway. "Can't say it hasn't crossed my mind." "We don't want," June said. "We need. The valley's dying. Men took from it, dug its ore, bled its water. The mountain gave us shape so we could guard what's left, but we can't keep it alive without a keeper of flesh and bone." He frowned. "You talk like I'm supposed to be some holy plowman." June's grin flashed. "Maybe you are. I'm just a man trying to survive. That's what makes you fit." Then she slid the whetstone along the blade one last time, slow and sure, and the sound made the hair on his arms stand up. At dawn, Lettie knocked on his door. "The wheat's come up," she said. "That's impossible," he muttered, pulling on his boots. "It ain't rained near enough." Outside, the field shimmered with green. Shoots reached knee-high where yesterday there'd been dust. Eli knelt, rubbing the soil between his fingers, cool, damp, rich as river clay. He looked up at Lettie. "How?" "The mountain keeps its promises," she said simply. He stared at her, and for the first time noticed that her eyes weren't gray or blue. They shifted like sky before a storm. That evening, Eli rode down to the trading post 10 miles south. He needed to clear his head, to speak to someone whose feet stayed on ordinary ground. The storekeeper, old Ben Craddock, nearly dropped his pipe when he saw him. "Lord above, Eli Granger, thought you'd sold that cursed place." "Cursed?" Eli asked. Ben leaned across the counter. "Ain't you heard? Every man who's tried to work that farm ends up vanishing. First was the Dawson boys. They found the plow still warm, horses standing in their traces. Then that preacher from Dakota. He came saying he'd turn it to a mission. Never made it past spring." Eli forced a laugh. "Maybe they just couldn't handle the quiet." Ben shook his head. "Or maybe the mountain don't like being owned." The word stuck with him all the ride home. When he reached the ridge, night had settled again. The cabin glowed like a lantern in the fog. He dismounted slow, listening. No voices, no movement. Only the steady hiss of crickets. Inside, the women were waiting. Mara stood by the hearth. June leaned against the door. Lettie sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands folded. The air felt charged, as though a storm had gathered indoors. "You went down the mountain," Mara said, not angry, just knowing. "I had to see a man," Eli replied. "Needed supplies." June's eyes flashed. "And what did he tell you?" "That this land's cursed." Silence. Then Lettie whispered, "He's half right." Eli's throat tightened. "You best explain that." Mara stepped closer. "The curse ain't on the land. It's on the ones who forget it's alive. Those men tried to own what was never theirs to own. The mountain punished them for it." "And me?" he asked. "Why spare me?" "Because you still listen," she said. "But the choice ain't over. Soon the valley will ask if you'll stay for good. If you refuse, the ground will close again." He looked from one to the other, the flicker of firelight painting their faces gold and shadow. "What does staying for good mean?" Lettie's voice was soft. "It means you give your life to this place. You tend it until it no longer needs you. And when you're gone, your blood feeds the roots." Eli swallowed hard. "That sounds more like dying than living." June smiled sadly. "Sometimes it's the same thing." He didn't sleep. Toward morning, he walked out to the fields. The new wheat swayed, though no wind stirred. He felt the soil hum under his boots, the same heartbeat he'd heard in the well. Mara's voice rose behind him. "You can leave now." "Eli Granger, the mountain will let you ride away if you wish, but if you do, all this will wither before the next moon." He turned. "And if I stay?" "Then you'll keep it alive," she said. "But you'll belong to it completely." He looked over the valley, the land his father once called worthless, the place that had starved him for years, and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe he'd been wandering for this answer all along. He met her gaze. "Reckon a man's gotta belong somewhere." Mara nodded once. "Then you've already chosen." The sun rose bright that day. The air smelled of wet grass and iron. The three women walked out into the fields, their long shadows stretching across the new grain. Eli followed, the earth soft under his feet. At the edge of the field, where the first shoots met the pine line, Mara turned. "The mountain's awake," she said. "It will speak before sundown. When it does, you must answer." "How?" Eli asked. "You'll know." They left him then, disappearing one by one into the trees until only their echoes remained. All afternoon he worked, fixing the fence, clearing stones, anything to keep his hands busy. But by dusk the air grew heavy again, humming low. The cattle stirred restlessly. The wheat bent, though there was no wind. A tremor rolled underfoot. Eli steadied himself. Then, from the heart of the valley, a voice, deep, slow, neither male nor female, rose like thunder wrapped in prayer. "Do you belong, Eli Granger?" He fell to his knees, hands in the soil. The ground was warm, pulsing. "I do," he whispered. The voice rumbled again. "Then stay." The hum faded. The earth stilled. When Eli looked up, the sky above the ridge blazed red gold. 3 hawks circled there, gliding together before vanishing into cloud. He knew then that the women were gone, and that they were never merely women at all. That night, alone by the fire, Eli felt the farm breathing around him. The walls creaked, the floor thrummed, and through it all came a peace he'd never known. He wasn't afraid. He was home. The years that followed rolled by quiet as snow melt. Seasons rose and fell, storms came and went, and the valley, once cracked and dying, turned green again. Eli Granger kept to his work, sunup to sundown, feeding the earth that had once starved him. Neighbors from down the trail began to whisper that he'd struck a bargain with something unholy. No man works land that cursed and lives, they said, but Eli did live, and more than that, he thrived. His cattle fattened, his fields yielded more grain than they had in a decade, and the creek never ran dry again. Sometimes when the wind blew a certain way, he'd still hear them, the three voices, low and calm, weaving through the trees. They weren't words exactly, more like the sound of breath on stone. When the work grew heavy, those whispers lifted him. When loneliness crept in, the wind itself seemed to hum their names. Mara, June, Lettie. One spring morning, while he was mending a fence near the ridge, a rider came up the trail. It was Ben Craddock, the same storekeeper who'd warned him years ago. The old man reined in his horse, jaw slack as he looked around. "I'll be," he muttered. "This place is near paradise. Last time I rode by, it looked fit for buzzards." Eli wiped his hands on his trousers and smiled faintly. "Just needed a little faith, Ben." Ben dismounted, squinting toward the fields. "Faith, eh? Well, whatever you got, it's more than seed and sweat. Folks in town say you ain't been down in years." Eli shrugged. "Ain't needed to. The mountain provides." Ben looked uneasy. "You sound like them old legends. Talking like dirt's a preacher." "Maybe it is," Eli said softly. "Maybe we just never listened right." Ben chuckled nervously, mounted again, and tipped his hat. "Just don't let it talk you under, friend." Then he rode off without looking back. Eli watched him disappear beyond the trees, then turned his gaze toward the peaks that rimmed the valley. The sunlight glinted off them like blades, bright and clean. "Ain't talking me under," he murmured. "Just teaching me how to stay." That summer, a drought hit the region again. Town wells dried up, and the traders who'd once laughed at Eli began to suffer. Yet his land stayed green. At night, thunderheads built over his ridge, and rain fell gentle on his fields. He knew then that the mountain was keeping its promise, and he was keeping his. Still, part of him wondered what it would cost. Promises that run deep usually do. One night, while he sat by the fire sharpening his knife, a soft knock echoed on the door. He froze. The sound was familiar. Once, twice, 3 times. The same way it had all begun. He stood slowly, heart pounding. When he opened the door, the porch was empty. Only the wind moved, swirling dust at his boots. But across the yard, near the old well, 3 figures stood in the moonlight. They looked as they had the first night, tall, graceful, unbound by time. Yet now their faces were calmer, almost tender. "Mara," he whispered. "June, Lettie." The eldest nodded. "You've done well, Eli Granger. The valley lives." June smiled, fiery hair catching the moon. "Men talk about miracles down below. They don't know it was just one man remembering his word." He stepped toward them. "I never forgot." Lettie tilted her head, her eyes like morning water. "But the mountain's debt ain't done. It called you to tend its breath, not hold it forever. It's time to rest, Eli." He swallowed hard. "Rest?" Mara's voice came quiet as falling rain. "Everything that belongs to the land must one day return to it." Eli's stomach twisted. "So this is the cost." June reached out, her hand hovering near his cheek. "Not a cost, a homecoming. You gave life back to what was lost. Now the mountain will give it back to you in another way." The wind rose behind them, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Eli looked around. the fields shimmering silver, the cattle grazing calm, the creek glinting like glass under the moon. He felt no fear, only stillness. He nodded once. "Then I reckon I'm ready." They led him down toward the well. The ground felt soft, almost breathing beneath his boots. The moonlight pulsed brighter with every step. When they stopped, Mara turned to him. "The mountain remembers kindness," she said. "Your name will live in its roots. The next time the wind crosses this valley, it'll carry your voice." He smiled faintly. "Long as it keeps singing, that's enough." Then the three women placed their hands on his shoulders, warm, strong, endless. The air shimmered around them. And for an instant, Eli saw not women, but something vast. Peaks, rivers, storms, and sunlight woven into shape. The daughters of the land itself. Light flared, blinding and pure. Then silence. When it cleared, the yard was empty. Only the wind stirred, humming through the wheat. Days passed, weeks. Travelers from town came looking for Eli Granger after he missed a delivery. They found his cabin neat, his Bible open on the table, his tools set by the door. The well was full to the brim, clearer than anyone had seen it. But Eli was gone. The townsfolk searched the ridge for days, calling his name, but found nothing except fresh green grass growing where no grass had ever taken root before. They said the air up there smelled sweeter after that summer, that birds nested in places long barren. They said the earth itself seemed to breathe easier. Some whispered the mountain took him, others said it blessed him. But those who passed the farm at dusk claimed they could sometimes see him, a tall figure by the fields, hat low, hand resting on the fence post, the wheat bending in greeting. And when the wind blew across the valley, they swore it carried a man's low voice, steady and kind. "Stay a while, listen, the land's still alive." Years later, a family bought the old Granger place. The new owner, a young rancher from Kansas, dug into the soil and found it richer than any he'd known. He built a new barn, patched the cabin, and planted a windmill where the old well had been. On his first night, a storm came down from the peaks. Rain beat the roof hard, thunder rolling like laughter. Near midnight, there came a knock on the door, 3 times, deep and measured. He opened it to find no one there, only footprints leading out into the yard, large and bare, fading into the mist. The next morning, his fields stood greener than before. He never spoke of that night, but from then on, he kept the land the same way Eli Granger had, careful, respectful, always whispering a thank you before sunrise. And the mountain, satisfied, slept again. But sometimes, when the wind curled through the wheat and the hills sang with rain, a voice could still be heard drifting across the valley, old and calm and full of peace. "Belong to what you love, and it'll never let you die."